Welcome to Unshakable Habits. I am your host, Stephen Box. And if you joined us yesterday, then you know this week we are really talking to the person out there that is completely overwhelmed by their schedule. You just have too many things on your plate, and it feels like you're always behind no matter how hard you are working. And my guest this week is Christine Jewell, the author of Drop the Armor and a faith-based executive coach. So, Christine, yesterday you were talking to us about just this idea of letting some of these things go, trusting in God, and really not depending on ourselves. And I know one of the places that is super hard for a lot of us to do, personally raising my hand right now, is when it comes to work. Because we have been taught that being busy is being productive. And we've been taught that productivity is the pinnacle of what we're supposed to be doing. So talk to me about this. Why is this such a problem? Like, why is it that we think that we need to be busy all the time?
Yeah, I actually think it's an addiction. I think it's an addiction. First of all, I want to say a couple things. Number one, there's a world program, right? That busy people, hey, how you doing? Great, I'm crazy. It's busy, right? Like it's worn like a badge of honor. We already know it's wasted and doesn't really make sense. But the program is still prevalent that if you're slowing down or you have space in your schedule, somehow maybe something's wrong, you're not doing enough. So there's a lot of collective programming around that is so distorted. Secondly, it's also it's habitual. We program our nervous systems to always need to be running, always be cramming more things in so that and you have to remember your nervous system, because we're talking about the habits, right? 95% or more of what we do is on autopilot. So we always repeat what your nervous system remembers, like when it's unconsciously operating. So if your MO, your nervous system's home is frenetic, agitated, right? And you always have to be in this chaotic thing. It's literally like an addiction where anytime there's peace or calm or there's not a million things on the stove, you're just like, wait a second, is everything okay? And that's actually scary because it's not familiar. So even though it feels bad and we don't like it, it's familiar. So it hits that security button and the familiarity button. And so this is where it's really, what do you want the new normal to be? And that is one of the first questions I ask all of the people also that I work with. And I ask myself all the time when I'm in a season of, I don't like this. I don't like being scheduled morning till night, always be running, trying to cram food in. But there's all these lies in my head around why I have to operate that way. But this is also like the familiar place. And this is why it's hard to keep promises to yourself sometimes. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And when we talk about some of those promises, right, throughout this week, we're going to talk about relationships and health also, right? And I think some of the biggest promises that we tend to make is I'm going to spend more time with my kids. I'm going to do things with my significant other. I'm going to make time for my health. Those are the promises that we tend to make to ourselves a lot that we break.
Yeah. I'm going to stop and actually eat lunch, have a proper meal. And then we're just like, we don't keep promises to ourselves. And I just want to say this, and this is not necessarily a topic, but I'm going to add it in. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you erode trust. So when you erode your own trust, you erode your own confidence. So people that are also in this state of overwhelm and are always breaking promises, what you start to notice is your confidence really starts dropping.
Yeah, I love that you bring this up because I'll just add here that not only are you taking away your own trust, because if you think about this from the standpoint of if someone else constantly cancels on you, you're irritated with that person and you stop trusting that they're going to show up. But here's the other thing. When you make a mistake, are you not harder on yourself than you are on other people when they make mistakes? That same thing's going to here. When you start breaking yourself, you'll actually be even harder on yourself for breaking those promises than you are for that other person. And think about how you probably react to other people when they break promises and realize you're not treating yourself worse.
Yeah. And I think that's when I talk about dropping the armor and the weight, we don't even realize how much unconscious weight around being angry at ourselves there is that we are not even aware of. Like we're so angry at ourselves because we're not doing the thing that we know we should. And then there's all this guilt, and then there's all this shame, and it's a very heavy place to be. And so now we're in this like swimming pool of these really heavy, dense emotions, but we can't seem to get out of it, right? So going back to feeling overwhelmed and also just not being able to keep promises to yourself and looking around is, I think you said something earlier about it's not so much of what we want to say no to. I think in release, it's sometimes we have to focus on what we're really saying yes to. And that's also a reframe, is to go, you know what, I'm afraid to say no. So what we focus is on the fear of saying no, or the fear of losing out, which is now we're focused on fear and lack. How's that work for growth? Like it does it, right? Instead of going, if I say yes and I go all in with this thing, then what can I create? Now we're putting on a creator's hat. And now, because when we're fully saying yes to one thing, everything else is not an option anymore.
Yeah,
But a lot of us are straddling all the time. Everything's an option.
yeah, that reminds me of the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. There was a line in there that always stuck with me, and I used it outside of just the idea of money. I used it for a lot of different stuff, but it was this idea of the poor dad would say, "I wish I could," and the rich dad would say, "How can I?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think that concept applies here, where it's instead of saying, "Oh, I wish I could let go of all this stuff and not have all these expectations and not have to carry around this big heavy armor," the question becomes, "How can I let go of this?"
Yeah. And even, yes. And let's take that even one further, which is, if I had already done it, what would I have gotten rid of? So now we're going into future state. And now we're not even thinking like, now we're already envisioning like it's already done. And so you already have the answer. People already have the answer. The question is, am I going to be ruled by fear,
Mhm.
or am I going to be ruled by the yes to what I'm being called to build? And this is like the eternal question that man and woman has to face every day. Will I be a creator of the new, or will I be terrified to let go of the old? It's just like, look at any great story, whether you're looking at biblical stories or anyone, you have to leave the familiar to go into the new space. As we're thinking about how do I get rid of this overwhelm at work, I always say overwhelm is just a lack of clarity. Honestly, at the end of the day, it's, are you super clear on what your heck yes, this is the authorized work. And if I can just focus on this, everything else will become easier.
Yeah.
It's like the concept of the one thing, which is like, what is the one thing that if I just do this, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary, or essentialism or effortless. There's so many different concepts.
Yeah.
And there's so much science behind this, but we're still so caught up in the program. And it's important to recognize what program has been running, because once you're aware, now you're choosing.
Yeah.
You're ignorant.
You said something yesterday, actually, that caught my attention. And it was that when you were saying you're going through your circumstances and you had this moment of overwhelm, that prior to that, you were looking at the programming you grew up with, where it was like,
Mhm.
oh, if you're fit, if you're winning the medals and the trophies and you're achieving this and you're doing all these things, then you're successful. And that was the programming that you were given. And as you were a few minutes ago talking about how sometimes we get caught up in that denseness of those expectations. If programming that we've had is that you have to achieve, you have to do all these things, it go back to your familiarity, which is something else you talked about yesterday. Your familiarity is work harder, achieve more.
Mm-hmm.
Completely counterintuitive, right?
More is better, right?
Yeah, I'm overwhelmed. Let me do more.
Yeah.
You say it like that, it sounds stupid, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So crazy. So true. I agree. And again, it's like so much of the world programming, and I just want to say this, so much of the world programming, so much of what we've been taught, we have to remember, like, where did we learn a lot of this? In a lot of institutionalized areas. We have to remember that a lot of the ways that we've been taught to learn, to grow, all of these things were based out of an era of industrialism where we're like, they were creating factory workers. Rockefeller was going like, I need factory workers. So can you just go take these guys, educate them to just pump, 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 pump to do more? but they were really creating people who could think for themselves and operate from freedom. And so we have to think about, is a lot of this programming coming out of this era where they were just creating factory workers and they were trying to squeeze as much as they could out of people instead of really creating an opportunity where people are actually wanting freedom and peace and balance in their life. That wasn't part of the original program, right?
Yeah.
And so this is really it. And yeah, I think that we have to remember, and I just want to say this. One of the things that I decided when I hit that point was like, I was like not willing to say yes to anything that did not give me peace. Because for me, I was like so tired of being stressed out. And so again, like being stressed in my work was no longer an option.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I wasn't like, oh, I need to get rid of stress. I need to release stress. I need to not be stressed. It wasn't focusing on getting rid of stress. It was focusing on peace.
Yeah.
I am no longer a factory worker in a system of just pumping things out. I'm not a machine. I'm going to choose the path that is going to make me feel like a human being.
Yeah, it's the thing I love about like doing stuff like this is sometimes people say things. It's something you've said yourself, but they say it in a slightly different way that just makes it pop, right? So like I've said a number of times when it comes to stress management, I tell people all the time, look, sometimes you can't reduce stress, but you can focus on recovery. It's the same concept you
The
just
same
said,
thing.
like, but you just the reframe of I'm going after peace, right? That's what it is. I love that reframe. And I think what that comes down to is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like what you're seeing really the solution to this problem is getting your priorities in alignment. You're getting clear on what they are.
For sure. It's a couple things. Number one, it's really making a decision. What are you consciously creating? What do you want to build? What are you saying yes to? Like that you're drawing a line in the sand. And so this is why I start with this is because when I say overwhelm is always a symptom of a lack of clarity because we're saying yes to everything. I had a meeting early this morning with a lady that owns a business and I asked her the same question. I'm like, what is your heck yes, I am building this. I'm so excited about it. And she was like, I actually don't really know because she was so consumed by all the things. So are you clear on that? And the second piece of that, because are you willing to make a decision that it gets to be that and not everything else? That's the thing. We can have clarity, but if we don't have decisiveness, okay, yeah, I know I'm going to build a team. I know I'm going to do this at work. I'm going to focus on this project, but then I have a million other projects to work on. We need to make a decision, right? Because the word decide, it means to kill off. Actually, you make an incision and you kill off all other options. So when you make a decision, now this doesn't mean necessarily that you may not also work on other projects, but it means like you set aside a deep work block where you are just focusing on that key project. And this is the season for that. So being in decision. And the third thing I want to say around this is really recognizing that God is the only one that is supposed to be all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipresent, multitasking, okay? Humans were not designed to be in all places at all times doing all things. What we are designed to do is do one thing, the right thing at the right time. Even Jesus, when he went into a town to heal people, he didn't heal every single person, right? He healed the person that the Father told him to heal, and he moved on. Think about the Samaritan woman. He spoke to her, and then he let her go and do the work of telling all the other people. He didn't run her down and chase her and just say, okay, I just want to make sure now that you get the message. But I always love to use Jesus as an example because I'm like, if we really watch the way that he worked, he wasn't doing everything all the time.
Yeah. If Jesus were to come back today, there would be people telling him that he needs to have reels of all of his miracles.
Yeah.
That he needs to get video testimonials from all of his healing.
Exactly.
That he needs to be on like all the social media channels and he needs to go live. Like they would have all these things for him to do. And it's like,
And that was really, I want to say, freeing for me when I said, I'm choosing the path of peace. I'm choosing the path of freedom. That means God doesn't really call me to do everything. So this gave me an incredible peace to go, okay, God, what is the authorized work, the mission that you have for me right now in this season of my life? What is the work? Sometimes it's been like your work right now is to build people, build a team. Sometimes it's write the book. Now it's do this, get the message out. And I can focus. Now I can focus without guilt because I know what it is. I'm willing to say yes to it. And I made the decision that everything else can wait. Right?
Yes, absolutely. All right. I'm gonna have you give your takeaway that you want to make sure everybody leaves with today. But before we do, I want you to give people a little bit of a sneak peek because tomorrow we're going to be talking about relationships. What is a big mistake that people are making when it comes to relationships that we're going to be talking about tomorrow?
I think that one of the biggest things I see is in relationships is putting everybody else first, having no boundaries and say being a people pleaser basically, right? So we're just like, I want to be, yes, I want to make everybody happy. I want to do all the right things. I don't want to rock the boat at home. And so we feel like leftovers because we treat ourselves like leftovers.
That sounds like it's going to be a very conversation that's going to probably rub some people the wrong way, but in a good way. So,
Yeah.
so before we wrap up, could you give us what is today's takeaway that you want to make sure everybody leaves with?
Today, I want to challenge you guys listening and invite you. And by the way, I'm going to preface this is only for those of you who really want change. Because some of us think we want change, but all we really want is somebody to listen to our excuses. So if you really want change, I want to challenge you and invite you to make a list of all the things that you've been saying yes to, that you really need to be, that you want to be saying no to secretly. What are all the things that you have said yes to that you really want to be saying no to? And what are all the things you keep saying no to that are the yeses? And I want you to circle the one yes that you think is the most, if you would commit to doing that one thing, would make everything else easier.
I think that's a really great exercise. And if I can just add one thing to it, if you're not sure, nothing pops out to you, pray on it.
Exactly. Ask the Holy Spirit to shine a big old light, and just like a flashlight, all that list will be made very clear to you very fast.
Absolutely. All right. Appreciate you sharing your insights today about how we can start to find some of this balance and drop that armor when it comes to our career. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about those relationships and how and why you should maybe not be putting everybody else first. Tune in tomorrow and you'll hear that message. And with that, I will just remind everyone that while none of us are born unshakable, we can all become unshakable because being unshakable is a choice.